On her 18th birthday, a girl aged out of the system with nothing but a duffel bag and a rusted key to a cannery no one wanted. What she found inside wasn't just a ruin of broken glass and dead machines. It was the seed of everything she would ever build. If you've ever felt written off, like the world had already decided what you were worth, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist. There was no cake, no party, just a woman named Mrs. Gable sliding a folder across a desk in a room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. My name is Ara Vance, and everything I owned that morning fit into a single duffel bag, 2 pairs of jeans, 3 faded t-shirts, a worn paperback with the cover held on by tape, and a photograph of a man I barely remembered, standing in front of a long tin building with his hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Gable had tired eyes. Not unkind, just worn down to the nub by too many folders like mine. Outside the window, the sky was the color of dishwater, and a thin sleet was turning to slush on the parking lot. "There's a stipend," she said, not looking up. $200. It's the last thing the state owes you. She counted the bills out flat on the desk, the way you deal cards to someone you didn't expect to see again. Then she slid one more thing across the wood. A manila envelope, soft at the corners. My name written on the front in a hand I didn't recognize. "This came for you," she said. "Been sitting in your file for a year. Some lawyer up north. Good luck, Ara, that was it. 2 years of my life in a folder, and a lifetime of somebody else's plans in an envelope I hadn't opened yet." I stood on the curb with the sleet finding the back of my collar, and I held that envelope like it might dissolve. I had no idea the thing in my hand was about to change everything. I didn't open it until I was on a bench at the bus station, under a flickering light, with a vending machine coffee going cold beside me. Inside was a single sheet and a business card. The card belonged to a Mr. Finch, attorney, in a town I'd never heard of, 4 hours into the mountains. The letter was 2 lines. It said my grandfather had passed, that I was named in his estate, and that I should come as soon as I was able. I read it 4 times. I didn't even know I'd had a grandfather. My whole life, the space where family should have been was just a locked door with no handle. Mr. Finch's office was above a shuttered feed store up a staircase that groaned under every step. He was old, with thin white hair combed carefully over a pink scalp, and a pair of glasses he looked at me over rather than through. The whole room smelled of old paper and furniture polish. He didn't offer condolences. He just gestured at the chair across from him and opened a file with hands that trembled slightly. "Ara Vance," he said, and his voice was a dry rustle, like leaves pushed across concrete. "Your grandfather was Thomas Vance. He left you the old Vance Cannery, 45 acres along the river, and the building that sits on it. He let that settle. I'll be honest with you. On paper, it's a liability. The building's been dark for 30 years, no working power. The county has it flagged as blighted. And there's an outstanding filing fee of $5 before the deed transfers to your name. $5. I had 192 left to my name and no place to sleep that night, and the only thing standing between me and this inheritance was $5. There is," Mr. Finch went on, "an interested party." He slid a letter across the desk, thick cream paper, a company name embossed at the top. Summit Creek Estates. They've been trying to buy that parcel for 2 years. They're offering $5,000 cash today if you sign the land over to them instead. $5,000. I sat there and I let myself feel the whole weight of it. $5,000 was a deposit on an apartment. It was a real bed. It was food that didn't come from a machine. It was a lawyer's retainer to start fighting for my little sister Maya, who was 14 and still stuck 2 counties over in a home I'd promised I'd get her out of. $5,000 was a way out of the free fall I'd been in since morning. I looked at the photograph in my bag, the man with his hand on my shoulder, the long tin building behind him. "I'm not selling," I heard myself say. "It's mine. I want to see it." It was the stupidest thing I had ever said. It was the best decision of my life. The bus that took me out there rattled its way out of the town's small gray orbit, past skeletal barns and empty grain silos, and up into the rolling folds of the mountains. The trees thickened. The hills steepened. Snow clung in the shadows where the sun never reached, and the air coming through the cracked windows slowly changed from diesel and asphalt to pine needles and damp earth. Halfway there, the bus stopped in a town barely big enough to name, and I used a payphone outside a gas station to call the home where Maya was. They only let me have 2 minutes. Her voice came through small and careful, the way kids get when they've learned not to hope out loud. "Is it a real place?" she asked. "Does it have a roof?" "It's got a roof," I told her, though I didn't know that yet. "I'm going to fix it up. I'm going to make it a home. And then I'm going to come for you. I promise." The gas station attendant was an old man named Henry, and when he saw the name on my paperwork, his eyebrows went up. "Vance," he said. "You'd be Thomas's people. Arthur's granddaughter." He shook his head slowly. That old man fought the county tooth and nail for years over that cannery. Wouldn't let them condemn it. Never would say why. He looked at me a long moment. Son of a gun. "You've got his jaw." Then I walked the last mile up the river road, and I saw it. My heart sank straight through the frozen ground. The photograph had lied, or time had. The cannery was a long, sagging skeleton of rust-streaked tin, half the windows gone, a birch tree growing up through a collapsed corner of the loading dock. It looked less like an inheritance, and more like a place things went to die. For a long moment I stood there with the wind biting through my thin coat, and I nearly turned around. I nearly walked back down to Henry's and called Mr. Finch and told him Summit Creek could have their $5,000. What I saw waiting for me there made me want to run. I'm so glad I didn't. The key was stiff in the padlock. I worked it back and forth, rust grinding on rust, until there was a loud protesting screech of metal and then a solid, satisfying clunk. The lock sprang open in my hand. The door swung inward and a wave of trapped air rolled over me, thick with the smell of damp earth, rust, and something older underneath it all. Trapped time, 30 years of it, sealed in the dark. Shafts of dusty sunlight cut down through the holes in the roof, and the dust motes turned slowly in the light like something underwater. My footsteps echoed off the high tin ceiling. It felt less like walking into a factory and more like walking into a church that everyone had forgotten how to pray in. The machines were still there, huge and silent, draped in cobwebs and canning-lined belts gone brittle with age. But it was the middle of the floor that caught me. There, in a single fall of sunlight, sat a wooden crate. Not tossed in a corner, not buried under debris. Placed, squared up dead center on the concrete, as if someone had set it down carefully and expected me to come find it exactly here. I knelt in front of it. The lid was nailed, but the wood had gone soft, and it came up with a groan. Inside, packed in straw, were rows of glass canning jars. But they weren't holding preserves. Each one was packed tight with rolled bills, bound in rubber bands that had long since dried to dust. I lifted one out with hands that had started to shake. I unscrewed the lid. I unrolled a single bundle in my lap and counted it, slow, twice, my breath loud in that huge quiet space. $1,000. In one jar. And the crate was full of them. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. I tried to do the arithmetic, and my thoughts just slid off it. $20,000 at least. Maybe more. Sitting in a ruin the county wanted to bulldoze. Sitting in a building a stranger had offered me $5,000 for. My legs went weak, and I sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, a jar in each hand, and a strange choked sound came out of me and echoed off the walls. I laughed. It was the ugliest laugh I'd ever made. And then, without any warning at all, the laughter turned into something else, a deep gut-wrenching sob that I hadn't cried in 10 years of learning not to. I sat there on the floor of my grandfather's cannery, and I wept. And for once there was no one to hear it and tell me to toughen up. I let it come. I let all of it come. When it finally passed and I could breathe again, I started setting the jars out in rows on the floor, just to make it real. And when I lifted the last one from the crate, I saw that the straw at the bottom was covering something, a flat parcel wrapped in oilcloth. I brushed the straw away, and through the cloth I could feel the hard corners of a leather journal, and tucked against it, an envelope gone soft and yellow with age. My name was on the front. I sat back on my heels and looked at it for a long time before I could make myself open it. The letter was written in a careful, old-fashioned hand. The letters slanting the same way as the writing on the envelope Mrs. Gable had given me. It began, "My dearest Dara. If you are reading this, then you are grown, and you have found the place I spent my whole life keeping for you. First, before anything else, I need you to know something. I never stopped loving you, not for one single day." I had to stop there. I read that line 3 times. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. "I know what you must think of me," it went on, "that I let them take you. That I let you go into that system alone and did nothing. Ara, I did the only thing I could to keep you safe. Your mother died owing money to men who do not forgive debts, and they would have used you to collect it. If I had kept you here, they would have found you, and they would have taken this land and hurt you both to do it. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I let you disappear where they could not follow. I made myself into a man who had no family, so that no one would come looking for the family I had. I have hated every hour of it. But I would do it again to know you were alive." I was crying again by then, quietly, the letter pressed to my chest between readings like I could get closer to the man who wrote it. "The money in the crate will keep you on your feet," the letter said. "But it is not why this place matters. The county thinks this land is worthless. It is not. Thomas, my father, your great-grandfather, filed the water rights to this whole stretch of the river back in 1911, before anyone thought water would ever be worth fighting over. Those rights have never lapsed. They belong to this parcel, and now they belong to you. The men from Summit Creek know it. That is why they want it so badly and are offering you so little. The whole valley below drinks from this river. Whoever holds these rights holds the water. I kept it out of their hands for 30 years. Now it is your turn to decide what kind of person holds it." The last lines were underlined twice, pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the paper. The foundation is the key. Everything is in the foundation. I love you. Build something. Grandpa Thomas. I found what he meant 3 days later, after I'd pried up a loose slab in the old pump room and found the strong box set into the foundation itself, the original 1911 water rights filing, the survey maps, and the deed. All of it stamped and sealed and impossible to argue with. He'd built the proof into the concrete, so no fire and no flood and no company lawyer could ever make it disappear. The next few weeks were a blur of hard, honest labor. I used the first jar of money carefully. I patched the roof, hauling tarps up a ladder that swayed under me until I learned to trust my own hands. I chopped wood until my palms blistered and split and hardened. I cleaned 30 years of grime off a wood stove and ran new pipe for it and got it lit. And the first night, it threw real heat. I cried again, but the good kind. I learned what I didn't know from library books and from watching old George at the hardware store, who started letting me buy nails and lumber on credit before I'd earned the right to ask. Martha from the diner drove out one afternoon and left a box of pots and pans on the step and drove off before I could thank her. A retired electrician named Walt showed up one Saturday, unasked, and grounded my wiring, and when I tried to pay him, he waved it off. "Knew your grandpa," was all he said. He'd have done the same. One morning, Henry from the gas station looked me over across his counter, taking in the blisters and the paint in my hair, and said, "Girl, you look like you've been through a war and lost twice." Then he grinned. "Suits you." The letters from Summit Creek got less friendly. 5,000 became 25,000. Then the words changed. Blight, eminent domain, petition the county. They knew I'd found the water rights. And they knew, the way circling things always know, that the small ones don't usually have the money to fight. Then Mr. Finch called the gas station and left word that Summit Creek had requested a meeting. I walked into his office above the feed store, not knowing it would be the most important hour of my life. There were two of them at the table, in suits that cost more than my whole building, with easy smiles that never once reached their eyes. They talked about community, they talked about partnership and progress, and how much good a development would bring to a struggling little valley. They talked, and I watched their mouths move, and I waited. Then they slid the paper across the table. $250,000. I let myself look at it. $250,000. I let myself feel every door it would open. The way I'd felt the 5,000 on Mr. Finch's desk a lifetime ago. And in the pause, three things came to me, in order. First, the feel of the wood stove pipe under my raw hands the night it finally drew right. Then, Maya's small, careful voice on the payphone asking if it had a roof, and my promise back. And last, the letter and one line pressed so hard into the paper it nearly tore. "Now it is your turn to decide what kind of person holds it." "No," I said. The smiles flickered. One of them started to explain, slow, the way you'd talk to a child, that this was a very generous. "I'm not finished," I said. "I'm not selling the water. Not to you, not to anyone. But here's what I'll do." And I laid out the terms my grandfather had all but written for me. The rights would go into a community trust, held by the valley, not by me and not by them. Every household downriver would be guaranteed water at a fixed rate, protected in perpetuity, no matter who owned what. Summit Creek could build if the valley voted to let them, but only under conservation limits the trust set, and only if they paid into it every year for as long as the river ran. I wasn't going to be rich, but no company was ever going to hold this valley by the throat again. They left without signing. They left without saying much of anything. But everyone in that little office knew they'd already lost. The papers were signed a few weeks later. They agreed to all of it in the end. The rights were too airtight to fight, and too public now to steal. The day it was done, I drove back out to the cannery, and I walked inside, and I flipped the switch Walt had wired, and for the first time in 30 years the long tin building filled with light. I stood there and looked at it. Not a ruin anymore. Not a liability. A workshop, a home, and the beginning of a small heirloom cannery that would, in a few years' time. Put up preserves under the Vance name and ship them all over the state, and finally, quietly, make the kind of living my grandfather had dreamed for me. 2 months after that, I stood in a courthouse with the trust paperwork and the deed and a steady income, and a judge granted me custody of my sister. When I brought Maya up the river road and she saw the smoke curling from the chimney against the mountains, she went very still in the passenger seat. "You did it," she said. "You really did it." I took the taped-up paperback and the old photograph out of my duffel bag, the same 2 things I'd carried out of Mrs. Gable's office on the worst morning of my life, and I set the photograph on the mantel over the wood stove. The man with his hand on my shoulder. The long tin building behind him. Home now, both of us. It wasn't a house. It was a home. I stand in that building sometimes now, early before Maya's up with a cup of coffee and the machines humming soft down the line, and I think about the girl on that curb in the sleet who had $192 and nowhere to go. The most valuable things in this life are almost always hidden under layers of rust and neglect, waiting for someone patient enough to look. My inheritance was never the money in those jars. It was the chance to build something instead of just surviving it. Abandonment, it turns out, can be a kind of protection. A curse can be a blessing wearing a hard disguise. If you've ever felt written off, like someone already added you up and decided you didn't come to much, I need you to hear me. You don't know yet what's waiting in the parts of your life that look like ruins. So tell me, down in the comments, what's the abandoned thing in your life that you're fighting to reclaim? I want to know. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.